I'm going to begin with a similar question for all of you because, as you see, we want to understand your role. So tell us a little bit about your role and what it's like to manage information in a company that's in a lot of diverse businesses and products.
Yeah, it's a great question. For those of you that may not know Baxter International, so we are a medical device, medical products company and a pharmaceutical company. 60,000 employees, over 100 countries, 65 manufacturing facilities, and then a various amount of sales offices around the world. So very diverse company. We make everything from propofol to beds. So it's an extremely diverse portfolio that we have. I'm the CIO for the company, and I've been there for 2.5 years. And to get to your question about managing information, it's really about, if you think about that diverse of a business, what can happen is that we get very focused on the individual business lines, and we forget how to bring the pieces together, or we don't put a lot of effort in how to bring the pieces together. But for our customers, that's the value in what we bring, is how do we pull the products and services that we offer together to provide complete solutions. So my job is really kind of because I sit in the middle of all of those businesses, really understanding what their strategies are, how they're driving those strategies, what the market is looking for, what our patients need, what our customers need that are caregivers to those patients, and then finding that common denominator of how we're going to bridge those things together to drive greater value for the company.
That seems like a big job. I wonder if you have an extra avatar or two to help manage this. That sounds like a lot. Mike Mahaffey, I want to ask you, we all know what Nationwide does, and I bet most of you can even hum the jingle. Insurance is one of the oldest, actually, businesses on earth. Your company is 100 years old now. Tell us a little bit about how Nationwide has had to use technology in order to bring this legacy business into the future.
Yeah, so a lot of people are familiar with Nationwide. A lot of people know the jingle. A lot of people think auto and home insurance, but we are as you said, we're knocking on the door of 100 years now. Originally started as a rural farm-based auto insurance company that slowly expanded into other lines of protection. We don't think of ourselves as an insurance company. We think of ourselves as a protection company because we've diversified into financial services, retirement plans, commercial lines insurance, excess and surplus lines. We're the #1 pet insurer in the country. So there's a whole bunch of different businesses under the portfolio right now, and we value that diversification. I mean, that is at the heart of an insurance organization, certainly at the heart of a protection company. But you're right, we're almost 100 years old. Most of the large insurance groups are old companies, and you think about that. If anybody should be a digitized operating model, it should be those companies. We don't have physical manufacturing plants. We don't have costs of goods that we stockpile in warehouses and transform into widgets and distribute. We trade in data. We are about understanding risk, pricing risk, diversifying risk, aggregating risk, and managing that risk. And yes, it's done through people, but all of that is a data-driven enterprise. We have to understand the propensity for bad things to happen in the future across all kinds of perils, weather-related perils, mortality, macroeconomic, geopolitical, et cetera. And so that's fundamentally a data-driven business. And so we and many in the field have spent a lot of time since our inception, but certainly accelerated as of late because the world of data is different, to digitize our operations and make better use of the data to do what it is we've done for most of our existence.
By the way, someone in insurance once told me, you need insurance. Insurance exists to allow people to grow businesses, start new things, take chances, basically to make major life decisions. You need insurance as that backstop. By the way, I saw some of you reacting the way I did in our introduction, finding out the #1 pet insurer. So I think you're going to have some inquiries for Fido after that. Rahul, you are with TransUnion, and that's perhaps the one company that needs a little bit of explanation here. So first of all, at 55 years old, you are the baby on stage. Your company's the youngest. It was actually started as the holding company for Union Tank Car Company. Very different business now. You're aggregating information about how many customers now?
So probably like close to 2 billion consumers, basically.
With a B, by the way.
Yeah.
With the
So for US, everyone's data, every single financial transaction gets reported to all the 3 nationwide credit bureaus, and TransUnion is one of the 3 credit bureaus which have accreditation as a nationwide. But besides US, we operate in 36 other countries, including India, which has a 1.3 billion population. That's why that number came close to 2 billion, basically. And then we are in Brazil, we are in South Africa, we are in UK, we are in Canada. So we are in a lot of geographies there.
Yeah.
And TransUnion started in this credit business as a company which was holding paper files on everyone without any computers. That's how we started, and it was just for the Chicago metropolitan area, Chicagoland, essentially. That's how we started, and slowly we transformed, and now we are a nationwide credit bureau, and now we are in 37 countries.
Yeah. So by the way, a reminder that I told you in this last panel, big companies, customers in the millions or billions, and data that way, and also revenue. And so Talvis, I'm going to talk about, and I want to bring up a point that involves a lot of money. Last year, Baxter revenue was $15 billion. The company recently made a $12.6 billion acquisition in a med tech company, Hillrom. So basically, you're seeing that it's a company that's willing to leverage a lot of its assets on technology. So that was a big decision. I know it wasn't your decision, but I want to ask you how major moves like this impact the company strategy. In some ways, companies have to make major moves like this.
Yeah, start off with, first we ground everything we do in our mission, and our mission is to save and sustain lives. And that's a pretty big goal, right? It's lofty, but it grounds everything that we do. And as we looked at our strategy, so the fact that we acquired Hillrom didn't change our strategy. Acquiring Hillrom was a part of our strategy. It helped deliver a key component of our strategy, which is all about connecting patients, caregivers together in a way that they can't do it today, in a way that it is much more effective and efficient to delivering high quality care and helping us to focus on delivering our mission of saving and sustaining lives. So when we took on that decision to acquire Hillrom, it was very intentional to help build out that component of our strategy that was already there. And now that we have Hillrom, we're working very hard to integrate it into the rest of the parts of the business. Like I said, we do everything from propofol to bed. So how do you find the connectivity between those things to drive a better healthcare outcome for patients and also allow caregivers to deliver care more efficiently and more effectively? We talked a lot today about the pandemic. The pandemic has had, I think, some significant things that have helped drive innovation, but one of the things that have also come out of that is this limited resource pool, or people opting out, especially in the medical field. It was heavily taxing for those people. So a lot of folks opted out of it, which means that the number of caregivers have gone down. So how do you provide high quality of care, because you still have the same number of patients and growing, with less people that are willing to do it? And the way to do it is with automation, data, and technology. So putting a huge focus on that, and Hillrom helps us to do that with this portfolio of products that it had when we acquired it. But we also, that was part of our strategy going forward. So we had digital health products as well. So combining those things together, we're able to create way better, greater value than the companies could have separately.
Good decision then. Mike, I want to ask you to talk about automation as it impacts how Nationwide does business. Before, insurance was someone would come to your door and maybe sit down with papers and those files and write out a policy for you. Now people buy insurance very differently, and there are so many more products. I know that you're a chief strategy officer there, so remind us and also enlighten us how this business has changed so much.
Yeah, it really has transformed a lot. I mean, as I said, the underlying key ingredient of everything we do is data. And the way in which we transform that into a policy is different. The way in which we transform that policy through our distribution to customers is different. More of the interactions, there's a buzzword in insurance generally called embedded. How do our technology systems connect in through our distribution, which is also changing? How does that distribution connect into end consumers? More and more of that is digitized. And so we went through, with 10 core business units, we went through a decade of core systems modernization to get us to, I'll say, technology parity across them, and then made huge investments in APIs to sort of digitally transform those interactions. We have, I think, an inventory of somewhere around 500 or so active APIs that generated last year 15 billion internal transactions and a growing cadre of around 20 million transactions with customers. So more and more, as you said, of our interactions are digitized and automated. What that looks like from the top of the house, if we think about sort of the big picture, if I take you on that 10-year journey I talked about, systems modernization, 10 years ago, we were about a $31 billion sales organization with about 35,000 employees. We've moved 31 billion to 57 billion, but taken employees from 35,000 to 24.
Wow.
And yes, that has a mix of business and other things embedded in there, but it shows you the transformation and the application of technology at scale to digitize what we do and how we do that with our customers.
I want to stay with you for a moment. We have a great audience question that brings up cost, efficiency, cost avoidance in certain automation systems and how they're evaluated. And I want to bring up the fact that insurance, necessary, but it's also an industry that is under a lot of stress right now, because all you have to do is watch the news and see how many hurricanes and tornadoes and floods are hitting. So how is intelligent automation helping to mitigate costs that can't always be predicted, just like Mother Nature can't be predicted? I know that automation has helped nationwide cost save in the billion-dollar range.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about most insurance businesses, kind of think of two chunks of the cost equation. There's the expense ratio, which is what it costs to operate our business, and there's the loss ratio, which is what it costs to pay claims. And we generally think of the trade combined ratio as $1 in versus expenses and losses out, and you want that to hover around at 1 or less, so that there's some profit in the equation, which is necessary for sustainability. Automation plays in both the expenses and the losses. On the expense front, that ratio I just mentioned, how big is our enterprise and how much are we relying on repetitive human work that can be digitized for both lower cost but also much greater speed and agility. And we've done a ton to take about $1.3 billion out of the cost structure over the last 3 years alone. But the much bigger part of the equation is the loss side, which is, there you're dealing with climatic events, you're dealing with geopolitical events, you're dealing with macroeconomic events. That's the nature of our business. Data flows into how we think about not just the propensity for those events and how it's changing. We use data and analytics for all of those decisions in terms of how we create the products and price them. But importantly, what is the propensity for those things to correlate and happen together? You might think that a down equity market and a hurricane have nothing to do with one another, but it doesn't mean they can't happen at the same time. So massive amounts of data and computational power are deployed to help think about what's the distribution of outcomes and how much capital do I need to be able to withstand the probability that I'll be wrong from time to time.
Rahul, we have another great audience question. I think that you would be good to answer this, and feel free to jump in as well, any of the other gentlemen, because you do have these 2 billion customers, you do collect a lot of information about them. So someone's asking, how do you integrate privacy into the operating model? And actually, privacy is important to all of your businesses, especially with medical stuff. But Rahul, if you could talk about that with a growing, exponentially growing amount of data that you have to protect, that you have to manage. Privacy is always a big issue.
Absolutely. So credit bureaus are essentially data analytic companies. They get tons of data every day, every week, and then they got to analyze that data and then put it in the relevant consumer files. Couple of years back, we used to get like 15 terabytes of data every week. This figure must have grown since then, and that was just only for US. So you can assume the scale of the data. So when we are trying to automate any business process, we always have to look at the data privacy and the security, because at TransUnion, we take the data security and data privacy very, very seriously. So in terms of having the accesses to the system, so like whatever program accesses are, they're very highly monitored and then controlled. We have a proper SDLC program where things will be designed, reviewed, code reviewed before, and then there will be segregation of duties, so whatever is in development cannot be moved in production. So clear segregation of the duties, separate user IDs and all will be there. So if the bots are working on the sensitive data, the bots in the development area, they have a separate ID, separate system. So this is all built from the ground up as part of the program.
You all hold such senior roles in your company, so I want to quickly ask all three of you the same question, Talvis, because you're right to my left. How do you launch new automation projects? Do people internally pitch them to you? How do you decide to embrace them? And since we're running out of time, I might, if you wish to include, how do you know when to kill them?
Great. So I think it's highly dependent on the maturity of the organization with regard to automation. So I've had the opportunity to help drive automation in 2 different companies, and I've seen similarities across the two, some themes around when you get started, there's generally a lot of resistance in the organization around it. We heard about it in the first panel about people maybe worried about their jobs, et cetera. So you sort of kind of really open up the aperture, and you have people to look at their processes from end to end, which that in and of itself, at least for the companies that I've participated in, has been a new thing for them, is really to understand end to end how the processes work. But after you do that, you don't necessarily tie a ton of financial results to that, right? You're trying to plant a seed in the organization and grow a culture. So you open the aperture up, you allow the people to, with the right tool set, to do the automation across the sets of processes that you've outlined. Now, the security pieces in privacy is extremely important. You need to build that in from the beginning. It needs to be by design. So we do privacy and security by design, and it's a part of the automation process as well. What results at the end of that is generally lots of ideas that come, lots of activity that happen, and you probably get about 10% efficiency out of that. But you take that 10% efficiency, you publicize it to the rest of the organization and to really grow the capability in the organization. And then once you get to a stabilization stage where you have general understanding of automation and what it means and how you can deliver it, then you put more rigor around the ROI, the ROI for it, and what projects you're going to accept and which ones you're not going to accept. Because you'll find that you have a tremendous amount of demand that's out there for this automation, but not all of that automation makes a lot of sense. And in some cases, you even have requests for automating things that you shouldn't automate. The process is a mess, you just get a mess faster. Let's fix the mess, and then we'll think about automating.
I think that's the line of the day that I'm going to remember. Thank you so much. Mike, you had brought up before how automation helps streamline the data that you need to collect. And I'm going to guess that part of the adoption within your organization is that automation can increase the job experience for the people that work at Nationwide, because they don't have to do this very tedious work that we are seeing is driving a lot of people away. And I'm sure, Rahul, the same questions there. But can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned before sort of the shifting aggregate numbers of our employee population, but underneath that, there's a vastly different composition, I'll say, of skill sets that are employed for those jobs. And it doesn't mean they're different people. We've invested very heavily across our culture in a program we call Workforce of the Future, to sort of retool and reskill and help people move to where we think, you know, kind of the old skate to where the puck is going adage. How do we get people prepared for that digital transformation of the workforce and the processes we conduct internally? That does require a very different skill set. And we don't think of that as a process with a start and a stop. I mean, our our core thesis in our strategy. And I've got kind of a random grab bag of stuff. I have strategy and digital and innovation in our pet insurance business. If I didn't mention, that was the largest in the U.S. And then our corporate development group. So we think of that as a journey, and we're constantly reinvesting to sort of upskill and reskill those things. And part of my role and part of our strategy is to say, how do we get this place ready for the next 100 years? And that's a lot more about building the athlete we want to become, as opposed to picking a destination and saying we'll get there and we'll be done. This is about muscle memory and learning an entirely different set of skills to adapt to a very data-centric, artificial intelligence augmented digital world.
I just want to put it out there. I love my job at Bloomberg, but I will volunteer to be a puppy underwriter because I think that would be great. I would need to walk them, make sure they're in good health, everything. So we are down to our last 3 minutes. So I want to start with Rahul. You are growing. You were just talking about adopting, growing in India. So I want to just quickly ask you to close out how you create adoption within this massive company that has so many customers and a big workforce. How do you create fast adoption? Because the one thing we know is that with technology, the changes are happening faster and faster and faster, and it can be jarring both for the workforce and for the customer. So how do you create that culture of, you know what, we're going to trust this and we're going to buy into it?
So there are a couple of ways what we do in order to make the adoption of automation at a faster scale. One is educating people about the capabilities of the program. So that's like our outreach. And then the second part is that we share our success stories related to what we have done for these. And I have many very happy internal customers who are ready to vouch for our work. So that kind of becomes biggest seller. The other way where adoption happens very fast is when somebody has a pain point.
Yeah.
So, and they cannot solve that problem on their own. So for example, in a changing legislative environment, and credit bureaus are highly regulated industry. So when some legislation changes and now some new requirement has come and that needs to be managed within a specified period of time, they cannot hire enough people to meet that requirement. So then they come to automation team, can you please help us, basically. Yeah.
So Talvis, I saw you nodding your head when Rahul mentioned pain point. Is that a similar experience at Baxter?
Absolutely. You need to have a use case. The use case usually is grounded in some pain point in the organization. It should be, right? A problem you're trying to solve. And that's where you get the greatest focus. With these technologies and with these processes, I think it's very important to have them grounded in your strategy, have them grounded in your business operating model, and have them grounded in solving problems, right? And you may not always solve the problem the way that you intended, but if you focus on increasing the capability of the organization, then the organization has learned, right? Those people that have done those experiments have learned, and then the next time, they'll likely be more successful.
Yeah. And Mike, I want to ask you a similar question at the end. Your business has to create security in an environment that you don't know what the problems are going to be or when they're going to arrive or how many will arrive. Same thing, automation has to be key to that, and preparing both the customer and your workforce to be able to deal with these changing situations.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what Talvis said resonates with me. I mean, we're sort of a mission-driven company, and our mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care across all of those things. I mean, automation and data is sort of the lifeblood around how we do that, and it's changing dramatically. And so how we reinvest in our culture to keep up with that and prepare for the future is critical.
Rahul, Mike, Talvis, thank you so much for sharing incredible insights. Really, really thank you.